Welcome to another episode of In the Real. This week we're examining Her and Goodfellas at the level of ideology. I think one of the best ways to understand ideology is to look at the construction of gender, especially in films like Her and Goodfellas, because they're 23 years apart, and there certainly shows a shift in what is considered masculine behavior and feminine behavior, or man and woman. So, Goodfellas is released in 1990 and Her in 2013. And we see two very different types of men. In Goodfellas, the men are hard, and they're allowed to express a great deal of anger. On top of that, there's really no compassion for other people outside of the mafioso family, and even compassion within inside the mafioso family. It's a very tight-knit group. With Her, certainly we get the feel that the characters in Her do feel for others. They feel so much that Theo is able to write letters for women and men using a masculine and a feminine voice. And you do not see that compassion and that sensitivity in any of the characters in Goodfellas. I always think about Henry Hill. Ray Liotta is the actor. I always think of him as sort of this mediator. When things are about to go awry, scene after scene, he tries to calm it down. And there is this moment where you can see it in his acting and in his eyes, a shock at the violence and the unnecessary violence. And on top of that, when we look at Goodfellas, it is all about violence, and violence almost equated with sex. If you think about the young Henry Hill, when he gets pinched, he goes before the courts, and he does not run his mouth. He doesn't tell him who the source of the cigarettes are. And literally, Paulie says, "Congratulations, your cherry has just been popped." So there's this level of sex that is related to crime and violence. And I find that very interesting, where when we look at Her, sex remains as sex. And it is soft, and it is giving, and it is mutual. When we look at some scenes inside Goodfellas, especially with Janice, when she's showing off her apartment that Henry's has purchased for her, is renting for her, you will see this moment in the bedroom where Henry just climbs on top of her and starts kissing her in front of her friends. And her friends are saying, "Get off of her." He just takes what he wants. Whereas there's a whole sort of dance that we see between Theo and Samantha. And I realize that Samantha is an OS, so you really do have to talk things out. But even the treating of sex is quite different. In Goodfellas, you could call it almost animalistic, where in Her, it is much more sensitive. And both people want to make sure the other person is fulfilled. So I find that interesting, this difference in the way sex is handled and viewed. In Her, for the most part, it's a serious subject, with maybe the exception of Amy and Amy Adams' character watching her OS during this video game where you have this housewife who is, for lack of better words, humping the refrigerator. But we'll get back to women in a moment. I want to just go a little bit further with the men back and forth. One of the things I also find interesting, when Tommy gets killed, Robert De Niro's character, Jimmy, begins to cry. Now, the interesting thing is, you don't see any tears on Robert De Niro's face, but you hear some very light sobs. And Henry Hill, Ray Liotta's character, is witnessing this, and maybe he's in shock, but you don't see a shocked face. You don't see a compassionate face. You don't hear a friend telling another friend, I've got you, I want to support you. And the tears, I really do wish we saw the actual tears. It's bizarre not to see them. Sorry about the audio change here, but I also want to point out the anger that Tommy shows as well, knocking down that phone booth and hitting hard the telephone. But also notice Henry Hill barely being able to touch his friend to comfort him. It's crazy. But with the character of Theo, when he and Samantha have one of their biggest fights, we see Theo in the shower. And instead of seeing tears on Theo's face, instead the water from the shower replaces the tears. And of course, we get this feeling that maybe Theo cried a huge amount. And so the water is replacing that. But not being able to see men cry makes it, in movies, not being able to see men cry in movies, I think makes it harder for men to cry in life. And it creates a lot of problems. Now, the beautiful thing is there is a moment where we see tears streaming down Theo's face at the very end of the movie. And I should say streaming down his face. He really just cries that one Academy Award-winning tear. And that is helpful. But it's a very dignified cry, a very controlled cry. And I feel as though, this is my point of view, that men who have suffered great traumas and great loss would be so helped if they knew they could have a good cry. But we don't see that permission anywhere. We get that permission to cry from maybe friends and family. But a lot of times, as little boys, we hear, don't cry. It's not manly. And that, I believe, creates psychological problems. But I'm not going to get way deep into that. Now, let's take a look at the construction of women. In Goodfellas, all the women are housewives with kids. Except for, I think her name is Gina, who helps Henry Hill with the drug business that he's a part of. She's the one person that we see doing... I don't want to say that, because I feel very much so that housework is work. It's a lot of work to keep a house nice and to keep after the kids and to raise the kids. Unfortunately, it's still not treated in a way that is fully respected. So that brought me right to her. And Amy's character, the character Amy, has a job. And what I find interesting is when she is with her OS and Theo is there with her and watching this thing on the video screen. It looks like a video game where this housewife is in an apron and she begins just like humping the refrigerator. And I'm like, what is funny about this? I don't find it funny. Why does the character find it funny? Are housewives' works laughable? Is this showing a kind of pent-up energy that's being released? And Amy's character is laughing at it? It's something to think about. I don't fully have the answers for it myself. But because of her and Goodfellas back-to-back with Housewives, it makes me think more about that moment in the film, her. So, moving forward, with the women in Goodfellas, especially Karen Hill, you'll remember that moment where Karen is on top of Henry with the gun in his face because she's upset that he's been cheating on her. It is astounding that Karen takes all of the abuse that she does. Having a man cheat on her when she thinks she's in a committed relationship. Him beating her up, essentially, for pointing that gun in his face. And her then apologizing for her behavior, but we never hear him apologize for his behavior. And she has a really strong and good cry, and it comes through the words she is saying.
I'm sorry!
wonder what that would do for the men if they could have that kind of emotional reaction to what is occurring to them, besides anger itself. Going further, where do I want to go to? Now I want to put in a little bonus ideological information that I didn't speak about at the beginning of the film because I feel like this really needs to be said. What stands out to me always is how people of color are treated on film. And when I look at Stax, it is extremely problematic. Because here we have Stax, who's played by Samuel L. Jackson. He does not get as much screen time as the other supernumeraries in the film. And supernumeraries, it's just, it's actually extras, so I shouldn't say extras. The more minor characters get a lot more time, all those Italians, and they get a little bit more character development, and they get a lot more text. But what I find really problematic is how Stax is killed. He, unlike any of the Italians who gets killed, is on the runway to death. He is in a pair of underwear. And I find that somehow dehumanizing. Whereas the Italians who get killed are always fully dressed on their runway to death. And on top of that, we get to learn about the Italian characters because they have lines to speak. We're just told that everybody likes Stax and he plays the guitar, which is so little information. Also, you know, they, as people of color are being talked about in the film, they talk about how black people are easily pinched because they fall asleep in the getaway car. So they give this idea, that black people are lazy, which is far from the truth. And because we see this in this film, and it's said in other films as well, we get this picture of what a black man is ideologically. And it is unfair that what is being put out. And so, I don't know, I get a little angry when I think about it, so I can't find words for a moment. As I think other people should be angry about it too. And I love Martin Scorsese films, but I see this same kind of treatment of black people in Taxi Driver. Now, as it comes out in Taxi Driver, we have to keep in mind that this is the mindset of Robert De Niro's character in the film. And Martin Scorsese is trying to point out the racism. And I feel he does a much better job in Taxi Driver than he does in Goodfellas. I grabbed this footage after I had recorded the In the Reel, and I found the white Christmas tree to be really interesting. We see it just before the killing of Stax, and because it's white, we start thinking about the violence of white people towards black people. So maybe Martin Scorsese is getting at racism here. But to be honest, I'm not so sure. Also, the only reason I got that reading is because I've went back and I watched again and again. So it took me a while to figure out this reading. So it's not something an audience is going to get unless they watch this film several times over.
It's 11:30. We're supposed to be here. You know, we're supposed to be there by 9.
Yeah, I'll be ready.
Yeah, you're always fucking late. You're late for your own fucking funeral.
So I want to put that into your minds.